Hey, what is going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Pain to Profits. I'm your host, Samson Jagoris, and every single week we're bringing you knowledge, wisdom, and expertise from entrepreneurs to help you guys save time and level up on your journey of going from pain to profits. And today, I'm actually a little bit nervous because I got the podcast guru on the pod, Seth Silvers with Story on Media, who literally helps people build their brand on the back of podcasting and short-form content, long-form content. And so I'm really excited to, one, unpack his story about entrepreneurship, but two, talk a lot about the podcast game. And you guys can simultaneously see me get or hear me get schooled on what it takes to be and build a great podcast. So Seth, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Thank you, man. Excited to be here. I know it's been a long time coming. I feel like we've both had people that are nudging our shoulders, been like, you guys need to connect. Can you get in the same room? It just hasn't happened. So I'm glad to be here.
I know it's crazy. Before I started the pod, I told you this offline, but I didn't connect with anybody. I think I did a Google search or something like that. I'm like, there's got to be somebody around here who knows about podcasting. And obviously, Story on Media came up. I converted. We traded a couple emails. Mm-hmm. I ghosted you and never responded. Sales 101. You should have followed up, put me on your drip campaign.
Yep.
But here we are, man. So I'm incredibly excited. I think before we jump into kind of details in around Story on Media and your background into entrepreneurship, I think it's helpful if we kind of frame it up with, what's your story, man? Yeah. Where'd you grow up? Where'd you come from? How the heck did you end up in Fort Collins? And then from there, we'll transition into how the heck did you end up in podcasting and media?
Yeah. So I grew up in Fort Collins.
Okay.
So grew up not too far from here, probably like 25 minutes from where we are now. I live 10 minutes down the road in Windsor. So it was
cool.
The first interview that I've done that's actually been in person in my hometown.
Let's go.
I've done it in Fort Collins, but not in Windsor. So it was fun.
Awesome.
But yeah, I grew up here, and then my family moved here when I was less than a year old. So this is like all the home that I've known. Went to college in Oklahoma. Thought I was going to be going into ministry. In high school, I had started a nonprofit. And so I was beginning to see, like, me and my friends, we started this movement, and we were beginning to see like, oh, like our skills and talents and all these passions of ours were kind of coming to the top. And so we realized, like, man, I love bringing people together. I love telling stories. I love rallying people. And so all of these things. And then I think the community around me was like, okay, this would fit really well in ministry. And I loved ministry. I've always really had a passion for nonprofits. And so then I went to college in Oklahoma, studied a lot of business, a lot of theology, and a lot of communications, and kind of didn't really care what piece of paper they gave me at the end of it. It was like, these are the things I'm interested in. And long story short, in college, really realized like, oh, I feel like my passion is business. Had some business mentors in my life that I got to meet in college and really get to know really well, cool, where they had built businesses so incredibly successful so that they could give back. And so I got to watch these families literally give away millions of dollars, and watching them do that, watching how and getting to learn from them. That really helped me to see the impact that is possible with business. So I went into a nonprofit for about 2 years as marketing director, and then really realized, like, man, I know I'm going to start my own business at some point. Might as well be now. Like, might as well start like the failing and figuring it out process now, as opposed to like waiting 5 years. And so that was 8 years ago. And
yeah. So how old are you? Like,
I was probably 24.
Yeah,
20. Yeah, I guess I'm 32 now. So yeah, 24 when I started Story On.
Yeah, awesome. And then do you feel like it took off right away, or did it have a little bit of a slow start?
I did have the business plan for it to take off. So I had like the plan on paper of like, here's how it's going to take off. But I didn't know that when you write business plans, you're pretty much writing down the plan that won't happen. You're like, here's what's going to happen. In reality, you should look at it and be like, okay, well, let's write all this off, because this is what's...
Revenue just grows every single month. You have no overhead costs, no expenses.
Yeah, I was about to get married at the time. And so, it's like, oh yeah, we're starting this business. This is going to be awesome. I'm going to be making a ton of money. And yeah, it really, the first like 5 years were pretty flat revenue wise. Like, it's a really small team. I was, sustaining my own life, but also, kind of taking little odd jobs or odd contracts here.
Right.
That I didn't really want to, like, I wanted to pretend like it was all within my business. But in reality, like, there was a lot of little side projects that were like getting me through. And now I look back and realize like, oh, everything has a purpose.
Yeah.
And it was all just part of the process. But yeah, it was the first like 5 years, 5, 6 years was pretty flat until kind of 2.5 years ago.
Yeah, I love that. I was reading Psalms this morning, Psalm 1, and it's talking about everything in its season, right? And so we want it to be in our season.
Right.
But you got to definitely plant the seeds, work the ground a little bit. And there's a lot of just figuring out when you first get started as an entrepreneur, especially at 24, you're like, you don't know anything at that point. So you're just banging your head against the wall trying to figure it out. And eventually, I feel like the first 3 years are just figuring out. And then you actually have 2 good years where you're like, okay, I'm kind of putting together a couple strings of wins here. And so by 5 years, you're still an infant, but like, okay, I kind of got my feet under me and I'm ready to go. So, but I want to go back. Where did you go to school in Oklahoma?
So I went to Oral Roberts University in Tulsa.
And then the mentors that you came upon, were those people who were alums as a part of that?
So one of them was an alum, although I met them in Belize. So I spent one of my summers in high school or in college. In college, I spent one of my summers in Belize. I went down there for 3 months. I had friends that were missionaries down there. I'd kind of gone through like a pretty rough year in college. And so I was like, I just need, like, can I just come down and just work? Yeah. Like they were building a children's home there. So I was like, can I just come down and, I don't know, paint, build stuff, do whatever I need to do for like 2.5 months. And so I was down there and met this family that was one of their like main supporters. I think they had given over $1 million to this organization. They actually were a ORU alum. But we met in the jungles of Belize. And so got to know them really, really well. Over the next couple of years, they lived in Dallas, like 5 hours away from Tulsa. Yeah. So my junior and senior year, a lot of weekends I was going down and ended up using a lot of kind of the experiences I developed through nonprofits and through starting those. They were involved in the nonprofit space. And so we started working on some projects together. And then one of the other mentors was Mark Green with the Green family. They started Hobby Lobby and Mardell. And
that was one of your mentors?
Yeah, I got to know him really well in college because they kind of, long story short, they kind of stepped in and saved the university that I went to. So before I went there, like the year before, the university almost shut down. It was like $53 million in debt, embezzling all this crazy stuff. And they were like, well, we don't want to see this Christian university shut its doors because despite all the crap, there's a lot of good going on. And so they actually, I think they put in like $110 million to like turn the university around. They came in, they got a new president, new board of directors, new leadership, and totally changed the university. And now it's like in a completely different space. And so got to know them through a scholarship program that they started and that I got. And then after college, I had a conversation. I remember emailing Mark Green and kind of just saying, I want to learn more from you. What's the best way to learn? And I remember asking him, I said, I'd love to buy you lunch. Let me know anywhere in the country on any day and I will like meet you. And he said, okay, meet me at the Chili's at this concourse in the Dallas airport next month on this day. So I like left Denver, flew to Dallas to the right concourse, had lunch, learned a ton over 2 hours, and then just flew back home and was like back home at like 5 p.m. I was like, this is crazy. I feel crazy, but learned a lot. And I still have the napkin with all the notes that he gave me that day.
That's amazing. Yeah. Sometimes you got to do crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Depends on how serious you actually are.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that. And then you said you're married. Mm-hmm. Did you meet your wife in college as well?
No, I met once we moved back here. So we met kind of through friends with church in our church community. But yeah, I had moved back here in 2013. Her family had just moved to Colorado. And so she had finished school in Kentucky and then happened to move here. And we met and started hanging out and realized we loved each other. And it's been fun and hard and fantastic 7 years, I guess.
Sounds like pretty normal marriage.
That's what we hear.
Is she entrepreneurial as well?
No, not in the same way. She works with the school district and then she coaches volleyball. So we actually both coach volleyball. That's something we've gotten into.
Yeah, cool.
That's how we met, was playing volleyball with church friends. And so, we're wired pretty differently. And she's a lot more risk averse, which balances me out pretty well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's how there's most women that my wife's the same way. She's more risk adverse. That's how God wired them. Keep us grounded so we're not getting too far out in front of our skis.
It's helpful for me.
Yeah.
Yeah. And even like when I was starting the business and I had my business plan and I think at the time I was I was giving plasma twice a week because it was like, I can get
you're so broke.
Yeah. I was like $300 a month. This is awesome. And I also realized that I could be on food stamps. And so it was like, that was like $200-$300 of grocery money a month. And so she was like, do you think maybe you should like get a part-time job, like 10 hours a week, like one that maybe at a restaurant where you like get a meal every shift.
Yeah.
And in my mind, I was like, no. And then we talked about it. I was like, okay, yeah, that's a good idea. And so, yeah, it was just funny. It was just like, if it was just me, I could eat peanut butter and jelly sandwiches in my car all day. Like, it doesn't really matter. But because I was starting my business when we were also starting our marriage, she was really helpful to kind of be like, like maybe it's okay to like, yes, believe in everything that you're launching, but also like realize maybe getting a part-time job might help.
No, I love that because I think it's a big misconception, right? Is that you're just supposed to like drop out of college, go all in, raise some money, and you're just going to be super successful and it's not going to be hard. But I know countless stories, myself included, where you got to pick up a side hustle or you have a full-time gig and you start building something and get a rolling start on the side before you actually make the entrepreneurial leap.
Yeah.
It becomes even the risk is even higher when you got somebody else who's counting on you to not screw it up. Then you start having kids and doing all that and the pressure goes up, which, I think a lot of our audience listening to this can relate to that, myself included. I had like a entrepreneurial journey. I was in sales. I was trading futures and commodities. Then we went and started marketing a technology company, and I got to help grow that business internally. But I still had some consistency. And then I wanted to make the leap and, breaking away from making multiple six figures to basically you're on your own. That takes a little while.
Yep.
So that's where building real estate up and other businesses along the way allows you to make that transition. So I love that. Who else has had a big influence in your life other than your mentors? Were your parents entrepreneurs?
I didn't really think that they were until like the last couple. So my dad's a professional artist, always has been. And he's, as we speak, teaching art down the street at Res.
Oh, wow.
He's been the art teacher there for a long time. But growing up, he was a professional artist. So like he had his studio in our basement. And I remember, being a little kid and playing in like a playpen in his art studio while he's painting and stuff. And so I didn't really think about that as like being an entrepreneur, but that, growing up, that was absolutely like what he was doing, was building his own business, building a brand around his artwork. And he did it really well. So I didn't really realize how much that influenced me, but I think that my parents were a big influence because I always knew that they would support me in like trying something big. So, in high school, I remember feeling led to start this nonprofit. And as a 16-year-old saying, hey, I want to start this nonprofit. I don't know if they thought I was crazy or not, but they said, awesome, like go do it.
Yeah.
And I think that moment was really, really helpful for me because just having that support system of early on realizing like, oh, I can actually build something. Like I can go out, and if I have a dream to build something, I actually can do it. And they've always provided like wisdom around that. But I think being surrounded by people that would push me to try something instead of saying like, I don't know if you should try that. That was really huge for me. And so my parents were a part of that. Friends I've surrounded myself with were, I think in the last handful of years, or I would say the last like 2 to 3 years, really getting around business owners that they're clearly just doing way better than me and learning from those. There's countless relationships that's been really, really helpful, even in the podcasting space.
Yeah.
Talking with other podcast agencies who are charging 5 times or 10 times more than us, or they're doing, they're just like, there's always somebody that you can learn from with what you're doing. And so I think there's some big relationships, but there's a lot of little ones here and there, and trying to continually surround myself with people that are further down the road than me, knowing that there's some element of like aspiring and seeing how they're doing it and learning from them. That's pretty important to my success.
Yeah, I can relate to that story. My dad was a craftsman and a bit of I'd call him a solopreneur. He never quite broke out to be a real business owner.
Yeah, same with my dad.
Yeah, and it was partially because he always had to put his hands on it. If the door needed to be built, he's like, oh, that nobody can do that better than me, where I was the exact opposite of that, where I'm like, hey, you should have somebody like me who thinks about selling jobs and making money, because at the end of this project, like you're going to pick your head up and realize, oh shoot, I got to go find some more work. So I can totally relate to that. But my parents were always really good about, hey, whatever you're into, like we're into it too. You know, I remember my mom would try to talk to me about football when I was playing football. she barely knew what position I was in, but man, she was at every game. They were out there screaming my name, supporting me all the way through it. When I said I wanted to go play in college, whatever you want to do. When I said I wanted to leave my scholarship and I wanted to go take a walk on and try to earn another scholarship, yeah, go for it. Like you can do it, you know? So I think that is so crucial. And I think that as we get older, we let some of those limiting beliefs and those voices in our head that weren't our own kind of limit us from doing the things that we really want to do. And so how do you tackle those insecurities of entrepreneurship? Because you're not free from it. You just get better at wrestling with the voices in your head.
Yeah, I think a piece of it is it's certainly an ongoing battle. I think a piece of that battle is being honest about those insecurities.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about some of the misconceptions of like, it's got to be all or nothing. Like
Yeah.
you have to quit everything and only be doing your business. And that's the right path for somebody. But I think for me, realizing and embracing that like my path has been different. In a lot of ways, I feel like 8 years, I should be a lot further along than I am. And when I hear that in my mind, I need to tell myself, and I've gotten used to telling myself, like, this is my journey and this is great.
Yeah.
Like really being honest about everybody's path is different. And this journey is the one that I've needed.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big piece of it. I remember actually meeting with, I was actually meeting with a therapist. This is probably like 3 or 4 years ago. We were talking about a bunch of other issues that like were not related to business and like ways I was acting out and different things. And we were kind of trying to get to the source of it and realizing that a lot of times when I would like turn to certain coping mechanisms, it was because I felt overwhelmed with the amount of work that I had to do. And so I would just disconnect from it and go distract myself with something else. And as we dove into it, we realized like I was surrounding myself every day with and I mean, I'm in storytelling, so makes sense. I'm surrounding myself with stories of people who are better than me, are stronger than me, are wealthier than me, are more successful than me, all of this stuff. I'm like constantly reminding myself that I am not that.
Yeah.
And so it was for a while, I had to like really step back because I was realizing it was feeding all of this comparison for me because on Instagram and on YouTube, I was, consuming all of this content of people that were seemingly way more successful and way more wealthy than I was. And so then it was really easy to beat myself up, overload myself with work, and then put myself into a position where I felt like the only thing I could do was like disengage and go distract myself because I couldn't possibly move forward. And so I think I've learned to like balance that and to really like limit and be super intentional about who I am listening to.
Yeah.
What content I am consuming, how much I'm consuming it. I mean, my job is podcasting. So it's like I have to have some really intentional boundaries. Otherwise, I think that content and just consuming content all the time, I think it feeds our insecurities more than anything. So I think we have to be really intentional with what we do let in. And so that's been something that's been really helpful with like addressing those insecurities as an entrepreneur is being intentional about the voices and whether it's actual people in my life or kind of these like mentors from afar and podcasts we listen to,
Right.
Being really intentional about who am I letting speak to me. And so that's been a really big piece of it is being honest about my own journey, but then also being really aware of who I'm letting in so that comparison game doesn't just get out of control. And I'm actually being inspired by people that are healthy, but I'm not letting that put me in a position where it's like, well, I have to get there and I have to do it the way they did it.
Yep. Man, yeah. My perspective on that is it's an infinite game. There's no winners and losers. The only rule to the game is to keep the game going.
Uh-huh.
And if you feel like that person's doing better than you, then you're instantly making this, well, they're winning, so I must be losing. But if the game is just the game and each person's playing their own game, then it shifts your perspective. But I would agree with you. There are people who are very successful, especially in the podcasting space. They built huge businesses, and all they talk about is successful and everybody, you guys are being a bunch of pussies and you need to work harder and blah, 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 blah. But they never tell you the backstory. They never tell you the raw, hey, there were 6 years when I
Mhm.
made no money, you know, and I wasn't successful. And I found that the people that I'm drawn to are the super raw, authentic, and real. And I think that's the direction that content's going, is the person who can show up the most authentically and show hard on their sleeve, like you've been doing for the past 10 minutes or so, are the people who win long game, because it's just more approachable. It's more relatable. You kind of marginalize everybody, and you get this like little sector of like yes men who are like, oh yeah, everybody else sucks and we're so dope. And they're just
Right.
not mentally tough enough, you know? And I don't think that's the move.
Yeah. And, yeah, I've heard like some people talk about it of like mental masturbation of like this like content. Like
Yes.
it's like we're getting off just by consuming the content of all these people talking about success and mindset and hustle and grinding and all of this stuff. And our brain doesn't know the difference. So like our brain is when we're consuming all that content, like our brain gets satisfaction by us thinking about doing work
Yes.
and by us planning out work. And so if you sit down, and this is why for me, like I get stuck in strategy. So my strength is on the strategist, but my weakness is I will get stuck in strategy and not move to execution. And so I could sit down for hours and just build strategy. And now I'm in the position where that's what I do with our clients. Like that's my role. But I feel stoked to sit down and do strategy. And I could do that all day and not put it into execution. My brain actually thinks I'm doing the work. My brain thinks that I'm executing on all that. And so I think a lot of times when we're listening to all this content and all this like kind of like raw entrepreneurship stuff, our brain is getting off on that. And then we walk away from it and we're like, sweet, that was an awesome podcast I just listened to. And it's like, well, we haven't actually done anything.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the cautions of like this industry is it important and critical to be making content? Absolutely. But there's also like a responsibility with that. And we also have to be responsible for what content we're consuming and how we're actually implementing that into our life.
Yeah, that's so good. I find that when I'm just taking from social and consuming, that's when I get those feelings of insignificant. But when I'm creating and putting it out and adding value to the world, I feel so much better. There, Rory Vaden, do you know who that is? He said, "You're best positioned to serve the person who you once were." So once I got my head through that like I'm Yoda to somebody else's Luke Skywalker story, and I'm not creating content necessarily for myself. I'm creating it for somebody else. Everything got easier. And a lot of that anxiety went away because now I'm going to the platform to create, not necessarily to consume. But don't get me wrong. I do check my YouTube subs like 10 times a day. I do check newsletter subscribers like 10 times a day. I do check analytics regularly.
Yeah.
Because it does matter. It's important metrics.
It totally matters. And there's always a spectrum. There's like a lot of other business owners that like, they don't know their numbers. They're not looking at their metrics. They don't even know what metrics they should be looking at. Right. And so, yeah, there's always a balance with everything.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, well, let's dive in a little bit more into podcasting, which is your sector, your lane, what you're known for. How the heck did you get started in that? Why did you decide that was the lane of media that you really wanted to go deep on?
Yeah.
There's so many different places you can go, but why podcasting?
Yeah, so I mentioned that the first 5 years was pretty much flat, like revenue-wise. I was sustaining myself and delivering for clients, but I looked back over the 5 years and I think I had said no to 2 projects.
Oh gosh.
And it was because it was, our business model was like help small businesses market with stories. And I would always hear from people, oh, like that's too broad, I would hear from like actual successful business people like, oh, you need to niche down. You need to get more specific. And I always thought that when people said, niche down to blow up, it's like, well, that's great for Samson. Like that's great for everybody else. But like, no, we're good. Like we really can help everybody. And so I was stuck doing work that I could do. And so I thought that when people were coming to us saying, hey, can you help us? I was like, well, yeah, I can. So I would. I wasn't asking the question of like, should I help you?
Right. I can re-roof my house, or I could hire a roofer.
Yeah. So, when I started Story On, I knew video was going to be a part of it. I knew written form stuff was going to be a part of it. I knew social media content was going to be a part of it. So we just did like everything you could possibly do in marketing. Yeah. I don't know why, but podcasting was like not on my mind when I started it. I was not thinking about podcasting at all as being like, oh, this is like a really good way to tell stories.
Right.
And then in 2018, I think it was 2018. Do you know Kurt Bear?
I do know Kurt.
So
Bear.
Kurt and I,
Local think tank.
yeah. So Kurt and I have been good friends for a long time. We started talking about the idea of a podcast. Started talking about the idea of starting a podcast, tell some of the stories around town, and so I started the podcast. Kurt was kind of involved with those first like 10 episodes, and we kind of did them together. And so started the podcast. Miserably failed those first 10 episodes. Like recorded them, bought like $2,000 worth of gear, didn't know what I was doing. Ended up recording. They sounded like crap because I just like didn't know how to use all the gear, but I was too insecure to like say it. And so then afterwards I was like, man, these really suck. And so I sat on them for almost a year and didn't publish them. And then finally was like, all right, I'm not going to publish these. I'm going to redo them. We're going to start over. And so I started the Small Business Storytellers, and I wasn't even thinking about like the business side of it. I wasn't thinking like, oh, this is a business development tool. Oh, this will bring in new clients. I wasn't thinking about that at all. But some interesting things started to happen where people began to trust me more in other areas of our work because they heard the podcast and the podcast was done really well. So it was interesting because they were like, oh, well, you can probably do really well on like our email campaigns. Like I listened to your podcast and it was great. It's like that logic is not that logic doesn't make sense, but it's relevant. It's real.
It's translatable.
Yeah.
What is that? The Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Like,
yeah. Where people like see that you're doing quality work in one area and then they assume you'll do quality work in all of the areas.
Right. But that's also they don't have enough knowledge on media to know that that's not necessarily a horizontal move.
Exactly. Yeah. So I started to see, regardless of the logic, I started to see, man, podcasting is having a really good impact on our business. And more importantly, it's showing people that I can do authoritative, credible, quality work. And so that was really interesting to me. So we slowly had a couple other like clients or people in my circle that they were getting into podcasting. It was like, well, hey, we just started a podcast a year ago. You know, if you have any questions, let me know. So then, you know, we got a client. I think my first like editing job, we were charging like $25 an episode or something.
Oh gosh.
If you're listening to this, do not charge $25 an episode.
4 hours later.
Yeah. And if somebody is charging you $25 an episode to edit their podcast, then you should find somebody that charges more.
Yeah, get what you pay for.
Yeah, exactly. So I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so then after maybe a year or two, we were still doing a really broad marketing work. And we were doing our podcast, Small Business Storytellers. We're starting to do interviews with people around the country, not just local. Had a handful of podcasts that we were doing production work for. I got this really big contract that in reality I should not have taken, but I knew I could do it. Right. And so I did it with this company. In reality, it was a full-time job. But I convinced them
like
to
fractional.
Yeah. So I was like a fractional content strategist for their company. And so it shouldn't have been through Story On. And they should have just hired somebody full-time, but I convinced them to hire me through Story On. And in my mind, I was like, I can do both. So I just did terrible at everything. And I've heard some people say like, don't half-ass two things, whole-ass one thing.
Yeah. That's a good.
And so it was like, that was it. Like I was doing a mediocre job at everything I was doing. I was waking up at like 4:30 in the morning because the business owner I was working with, he woke up like he was East Coast and started work at like 3 a.m. So I wanted him to like see that I was emailing and on Slack at like 4:30 and just stupid crap.
Yeah. You're I'm an employee now. I'm not an entrepreneur.
Yeah. And so at the time we were getting ready to buy a house. We signed a contract to build a house. And then like 2 days later got fired by that big contract, which was like over 50% of our revenue.
Yeah.
And so it was like, well, shoot. What are we gonna do with this? Right. We just signed that contract. So it was like, because it was a new build, it was like, okay, well, we kind of have we have like 6 months for them to build the house before we like really have to like have everything in order.
And we could kind of delay it a little further if we had to. So
yeah. And so I remember talking with my wife about it, and it was like, okay, we could like, if we just play out the scenarios, like we could, I think we were still within the 30 days where we could get like our 1% earnest money back. And so it was like, all right, we could go to them right now. We could back out of this, get our 1% back, or we could move forward. Worst case scenario, we lose 1%. Best case scenario, business picks up, figure out what the hell I'm doing.
Yeah.
And we get the house. And so I told my wife, I said, I think that I just like, this is the moment to focus. Like I've been afraid to focus. I've been afraid to niche down. And so I stepped back and I looked at what do I enjoy doing the most? What's working the best? And who has been paying us the longest? And that was our podcasting clients. And so I was like, all right, we're cutting everything else out. We're saying no to everything else. We're going to do podcasting and podcasting alone. And that was really when things like started to, I say take off, doesn't mean I'm anywhere near where I want to be, but that was when things started to go upward. Yeah, that was when I was able to start like building a team, hiring a virtual assistant, hiring an operations manager, hiring an editor, like actually growing because we had the focus and people knew how to refer us. That was the thing. It was like, if you do everything, nobody's going to refer you because they're going to be like, well, I don't know what to say. But when it was like, we are at the time, we produced podcasts for coaches and consultants. People were like, oh, well, I know exactly who needs to talk to you.
Yep.
So that was kind of the pivotal moment where it was like, there were some life circumstances that put us in a position where it was like, we need to focus this. And if this isn't working in 6 months, then like probably need to do something different.
Yeah. Nothing like a little pressure to get you focused down on what you want to do. I love that. Why do you think people, 2 questions. Why do you think people should have a podcast? And who are the types of people who probably shouldn't use that medium?
I think that people, and I'll kind of speak to like business owners or entrepreneurs because that's who we particularly help with podcasting. I think business owners and entrepreneurs should have a podcast because it's one of the best trust building tools that people have. It's different than other media to where people don't typically stumble upon a podcast and then listen to the whole thing. If you look at the demographics, podcast listeners usually earn more, they're more educated, and they are showing up to learn something. So they're showing up with an intention. Oftentimes when people see shorts and clips and all this stuff on like Instagram and YouTube, which is a part of podcasting, so that stuff has its place, but you're trying to stop the scroll. Right. Like people are wasting time. You're hoping that you can stop them in what they're doing and maybe engage them and then lead them to like a long form asset, like a podcast or an email list or something like that. With podcasting, people are showing up with an intention to learn. And I think that a pretty important piece of almost any business is education. You know, there's a customer's journey, there's awareness, consideration, decision. Everybody looks at like the buyer's journey with different terms. And I'm sure in your days at Madwire, you guys probably had your different terms for that journey. But the point is a lot of businesses are trying to sell everybody on their journey as if they are on like step 25 of 26.
Right.
And so it's like, we're going to talk to everybody as if they're ready to buy.
Yeah. Direct to conversion.
Yeah. When in reality, people are all over the place. There's people that want to learn about your product. There's people that want to learn about the industry. There's people that want to learn about you and are you trustworthy? So a podcast is such a good opportunity to be able to like educate, inspire your audience. We call it like an educational watering hole.
Yeah, I love that.
For businesses. And so it's like they're going to be learning about your industry and your product and how to solve their problems from somebody. Why not you? Like that's just, people are going to YouTube, they're going to Google, they're going to podcast search engines, and they are typing in the problems they have, the questions they have. Why not be the one to answer them? Because if you're not, then your competitors will. I think on the other side of like who should not, and this has been a big shift for us in the last year, we are working less and less with brand new businesses and brand new entrepreneurs. So we describe our target audience as established business leaders. I define that by, your audience, how you're going to serve them, and you've done it. There's got to be that track record. There's got to be some level of establishment of actual results. And the reason being, if you don't have some level of success as a business, and I've often seen that's like $500,000.
Right.
It could be different in different industries, but I feel like if you're starting a business and you can't get it to at least like a couple $100,000, something's wrong. That's not bad. It just means like maybe it's the wrong product. Maybe you need to develop some skills as an entrepreneur. Maybe you're selling the right product to the wrong audience. Like you have to analyze what's wrong.
Yep.
And until you figure that out, you're probably going to assume that your podcast is going to be your silver bullet and solve all your problems. And so we've worked with quite a few people that it took us a while to learn that, to realize like, oh, they're putting a disproportionate amount of pressure on the podcast saving their business and solving their sales problem, when in reality, they have a sales problem.
Right.
This podcast going viral would be the worst thing for their business because they don't actually know how to serve their customers yet.
Yes.
So that's really like, I think everybody has to understand that. I do think everybody probably should have a podcast, every business, but if you haven't figured out those like essential business framework to where you're growing as a business and you figured that out, I think that your priorities should be focused more on fixing those business problems than growing an online audience.
It's dead on. I got not much to say to that. We used to see the same thing at the marketing company. Early days in their business, I need marketing. You guys are my holy grail. I'm going to pay you. The leads are going to flow. I don't have to do business development. I don't have to pick up the phone. I don't have to sell anybody or close anybody. They're just going to come in and hand me their credit card, and I'm going to close. And then 6 months go by. They would have improved, but they're not to whatever this imaginary finish line is that they have in their head, and we're the bad guy.
Yep.
And you don't win. It's better to just tell them, hey, man, you're not ready. Here's what you need to do to go get ready, and you'll have way happier customers, lower churn, better reviews, like so on and so forth.
Yeah.
We know the whole story.
Yeah. So I think the question is more like when. Like, when is the right time to start a podcast, as opposed to like, should you or should you not? I think it's right for most businesses. There's space to have a podcast. It's just, when is the right time, and are your priorities in place to where it's going to be more of a value add than a distraction? Yes.
I will also say that it's a certain personality type as well. I mean, I've met some really good business owners who probably shouldn't be. They're just not a good fit. They're not very charismatic. They're not great communicators. They work really hard. They built incredible teams. They've been in business for a really long time, but podcasting is not your platform.
Yeah.
And so maybe you need somebody who, within your organization, your CMO, your COO, somebody like that, who can take the lead on that.
Yep.
I know that you've been running a podcast for a long time, your own personal one called the Small Business Storytellers, but you actually recently just shut that down.
Mm-hmm.
Why'd you do that? And what's the new pod?
Yeah. So I shut that down, and I mean, it's still there. There's 100 episodes. You can find it. It'll always be available.
Yep.
Lots of fantastic interviews. Loved it. So we shut it down after 100 episodes. I initially felt like I needed to have a podcast that was more reflective of the season that I was in, and realizing the conversations that I wanted to have were different than the conversations I was having. I would love to sit down with you for like 2 hours and talk about like profit margin.
Yeah.
Like, that's something that I'm learning more about. And like, there's a lot of like more granular problems that I'm working to solve in business right now. And similarly to what we were saying earlier, there's a lot of basic business content out there.
Yep.
I'm really interested in providing and consuming more that's like actual tangible, like how to not just get from A to B, but like how do we get from like D to E? Like, how do we, once you're doing $1 million, how do you get to 5? Like those kind of conversations. And so I realized that our podcast was really great at getting some like initial stories out, but our focus was just changing as a company. And so we wanted to provide a podcast that was more focused on like going deeper into specific business problems than just telling a bunch of stories.
Yeah.
Neither one is right or wrong. It's just different. And so for me, I really felt like, mental energy wise, I felt like I couldn't do both. And I felt like I was just continuing to do the small business storytellers, or if I was going to continue, then I was only going to be continuing because it's like, well, it makes sense to keep doing a podcast. Like, it makes sense, like kind of the more conversation, like just keep doing more, just don't stop. And there's value in that, but there's also value in recognizing seasons have a beginning and an end.
Yeah.
And so for me, it made more sense, focus wise, mental energy wise, to be able to say, this was amazing. This was a great thing, but we're going to bring this to a close and give ourselves the space and time to really be able to launch something new. So it's going to be a pretty different format. It'll probably come out late in 2023.
Cool.
It'll be called The Business, and each season of the podcast will be like a 6 to 8 episode season that will actually dive deep into one specific problem. of business. And so
scaling people or whatever.
Yeah. It might be like, how does like the business of hospitality, like how can we integrate hospitality? And so we might be interviewing like people in the hospitality world, but then bringing those lessons in really tangible ways into like business owners' lives. Or it might be a whole season on pricing your services, or a whole season on profit margin and how to figure that out, like really going deep into those things so that people can kind of do like a 6 to 8 episode deep dive and get a really solid understanding of one problem and one question they probably have, as opposed to just kind of like keeping it like, I kind of know that story, but I didn't really walk away with a ton of super tangible stuff.
Yeah, that's so good. I love that. We're going to keep doing the storytelling format stuff, but we're going to kind of go the other way with the more interview style, tactical approach, which is funny that you say that. So you've given me some good ideas, because I do think that being able to batch them and say, hey, you want to learn all about sales, watch this. You want to learn all about profit margin, this. Back office, this. So I love that. What are you most excited about right now in your business?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm really excited about some of the clients that we're getting. Like, I feel like we are more focused in who we're serving, and than we ever have been. And also our clients and our relationships are beginning to multiply. So one of my goals over the next like 4 years is to build the most trusted podcast agency in the country. That's not measurable. I know that's not smart, right? All of that stuff. But for me, it's super important, and there's revenue goals behind that as well. But for me, it's super important that we have a really strong referral base, that people trust us they entrust us with their clients. So we have a lot of agency partners. And so those agencies, they already have a big client base. And so they are initially saying, hey, this is who we trust to do production.
Right.
That means a ton to me. And our clients being with us for a year or 2 years and then saying, hey, like, if you need to start a podcast, these are your people. That means a lot to me, that our client, like, those are the metrics that we're paying attention to. And so right now, the last like 2 months, we've just gotten a lot of referrals from that shows that people trust us. And that's been really great. And those referrals that we're getting in those conversations and the clients that we're onboarding, they're really focused, and they're people that we can serve really, really well. And so it's kind of just we're hitting a really good product market fit right now. And I think that that's been like a 2.5 year process to really narrow down to like, who do we serve? Who do we not serve? We're saying no more than we ever have before. Cool. Not because we just have like leads flowing out the door, but because I have a better idea of like who we can serve and who we can't.
I love that. Is there any challenges ahead that you see, maybe economically, your industry, business in general, that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So, I mean, I do think that like economically, and we've seen this happen with some clients this year, like at the end of last year when, we were, I don't even know when the recession started. Like when, like, I know there's like actual terms of like, here's what it means being
two consecutive quarters.
Yeah. 2 consecutive quarters. So I don't know exactly like when that happened, but I know that at the end of the year, we like lost quite a few clients because their industries were starting to be like squeezed and they were concerned. So they cut a bunch of costs.
Yeah.
I think one of the challenges is people beginning to look at podcasting, and businesses beginning to look at podcasting not as just like something that sticks around when they're in good times, but really realizing like this is an essential piece. And in a recession, it's probably a more important piece to be communicating with our audience than not. So I think that's a challenge. Opportunity wise, in the last like 30 days, there were around 350,000 podcasts out of around 4 to 5 million, depending on who you ask, that published an episode. So you have between 5 and 10% of podcasts total that are active.
Wow.
YouTube channels, 33 million YouTube channels published a video in the last 30 days. So conservatively, like, let's just say that those numbers are off, and let's like give some be generous and say there's 500,000 podcasts that publish an episode in the last 30 days. That's still like what, 1 to 2% of the active channels on YouTube. So I know that's not like a direct comparison, but that shows that the market is still super, super young.
Yes.
You also need far less engaged listeners and engaged people to sustain a podcast than a YouTube channel.
Yep.
And we can get into whatever complicated metrics there are, but like, CPMs, RPMs, all of these metrics are way higher in the podcast industry than they are in other forms of media. And so I think there's some really interesting opportunities where like the industry of podcasting is still so young. And I get asked, you probably get asked too, like, oh, I've wanted to start one, but it's too late. Like it's already too saturated. It's like the podcast industry is nowhere near saturated.
It's definitely harder than it was.
Yeah.
But that's actually what I love about it. But to your point, and I feel like I'm going to podcast content church right now. I was over here like, preach. But it's true, man. 90% of the research process is done before the customer ever picks up the phone.
Yep.
Trust is built on the back of 4 things: integrity, intent, capability, and results. So if 90% of the research process is done before they ever pick up the phone, and you can communicate your integrity, your intent, your capability, and results before you've ever talked to the customer, who do you think is going to win?
Yeah.
Right. And content is the new SEO of the 90s and the early 2000s. And those of you who are listening to this, if you're thinking about going into business and you are undervaluing the importance of building personal brand and building content, then don't start a business, because you are a media company first and you are whatever sector or business you're in second. And so I love it. I love those stats. Got me more jacked up. After this, I'm going to go talk to Darius and we're going to triple down on more pods because it is the future, man.
Yeah.
And we live in an environment where we don't trust our doctors. We don't trust the government. We don't trust our neighbors. Trust is the most important thing. And that's what content helps you do.
Yeah. 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 It's true. So, I mean, the industry is not going anywhere but up as far as podcasting. So I'm super stoked about that. Another thing I'll say I'm excited about is to launch more of our own shows. So like I said, this year we're going to be launching another business show. We're working on putting together a local podcast that will be sharing some of the like nonprofit and impact stories of Northern Colorado.
Yep.
So I'm really excited about that, and some nonprofits that I'm connected with. And for the last couple of years, it's been really easy to kind of hide behind my clients. And I mean, you've seen this in the marketing world, like it's where marketers are doing a way better job marketing for their clients than for themselves. We really haven't marketed our business much. That's why I didn't follow up with you, because 2 years ago or whatever, because it's like we didn't have those processes in place. And so we're adding that like operational excellence to the company, which I'm really excited about. And we're also saying we have our own stories to tell too. We have our own original shows that we feel like we want to launch, as well as launching and growing our client shows. And so I'm really excited to kind of put the mic in front of us too.
I love that, man. I think about it like a record label. You guys are the record label, and you got all these different shows or artists underneath you. I think somebody who does it really well is Dave Ramsey.
Mm-hmm.
And Ramsey personalities is what they call them. And
Yep.
they have different pods, and you speak to different sectors of their avatar, and so it's incredible. We'll land the plan. I know we're butting up on time. I know you got some more to go. So what is your best content recommendation, book, or resource that you think every entrepreneur needs to consume?
Yeah. So 2 things I would mention. One is a show that is in production right now. So it's coming out July of 2023. Not sure when exactly this will be live, but whenever this goes live, you'll be able to find either a trailer you can subscribe to, or the show will be live. That show is called $1 Billion Bullseye. It's with a client that we're working with. His name's Jonathan Cronstead. He goes by Jay Cron. He's the president of Kajabi.
Cool.
He was their CEO, and he took over when they were doing $6 million a year in revenue. And about 4 years later, he secured $500 million in funding at a $2 billion valuation.
Holy cow.
Yeah. Substantial. So he's been the guy behind the guy. He was the CEO of Digital Marketer. He was the CEO of a branch of Success Magazine. Not many people know his name, but he knows a lot. He's very well connected. And so he's just been doing the work. And so now he's like really transitioning to a season of his life where he's focused more on pouring into other people that are in the shoes that he was in and giving them like really practical advice for business and scaling a business. So I'm really excited about that show. We're recording episodes right now. It's going to be a lot higher. It's going to be a pretty highly produced show, which is exciting. We're putting good amount of advertising into it. Like it's going to be a top 50 business show.
Wow.
So super excited about that because it will serve my needs as well as a business owner.
Yeah,
Like
totally.
I'm running a successful business that I want to scale up. And so I'm excited about that piece of content. And I truly think that for businesses wanting to grow, it's going to provide a really fresh take on business advice that people need. And then the other one I want to mention book wise is a book called Profit First. No book has impacted my business more than that book. There's tons of books. I'm a huge reader. I've read probably hundreds of business books over the last couple of years. But as far as tangible impact, that book like really helped me to actually know how to price our services, actually know how to budget, know how to like build out a team, all of this different stuff, because I could have my mind around my numbers. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have to be a CPA. I don't have to be my CFO, but I do think every business owner, you need to know your numbers, and numbers can get complicated. So for me, that book and the Profit First like financial model was absolutely instrumental in like getting out of debt, getting the company into a healthy place, getting to a place where we can actually serve our clients, pay our team well, and be growing a business in a sustainable way.
Love it. What do you think separates from entrepreneurs from those who give up, quit, fail, or never get started?
That's a good question. I honestly think it's the like aspect of not quitting. I think what separates entrepreneurs and business owners from those who quit sounds simple, but is you don't quit. There have been many times over the last 8 years where I've had the thought like, oh, these are the days. Like these are the days when the stats come true. These are the days when it would be way easier to quit. These are the days when it would be way easier to call a client and say, hey, can I just come work for you in-house? And know that like we'd have a job offer. Like right. that opportunity is there. And so I think it really is, you have to know why you're building what you're building. And you have to just say, I'm not going to quit. I'm probably going to change plans. It's going to look different, but I'm not going to quit. And that's where my path has looked so different than I thought it would. But I didn't set out to build like a content. Like I didn't set out with like such a specific goal that it was like the metrics weren't the goal. The vision is the goal. And so knowing like the plan can change, but that's like why it's really important that we actually know why, not just where we're going, but why. I have a lot of things in my life I want to accomplish, and I know why, and I'm connected to those things. And the path will probably change. The opportunities will change. But I just think that not quitting and being willing to like change how it's done is super, super important.
That's so good. All right. Well, last thing, we'll land the plane here. What inspiration do you have? There's somebody scrolling through YouTube, LinkedIn, or just listening to the pod right now, and they're thinking about taking the entrepreneurial leap. They haven't done it. So what advice, wisdom, or inspiration would you give them?
I would say be willing, if you're wanting to start a business, be willing to like really step back and ask yourself what the right path for you is. We talked in this interview about how some people say, okay, quit everything and go like head first, go all in. And that's right for some people. We've also talked about how there's sometimes where you have side hustles and side gigs and side jobs, and that's fine too. I think really stepping back and recognizing like what is the most sustainable way for me to launch this business. Also knowing you have to put the pressure on yourself. Right. So put pressure on yourself, put deadlines on yourself, but also realize you don't have to quit everything, but maybe quitting everything is the right option. But take a minute if you're wanting to start your own business, but you don't know how to do it. Take a minute to actually step back and ask yourself, like, what is the right path? And ask other people around you. Because just because somebody else did it one way doesn't mean that you need to do it that way. And so I think for some people, it very really like the very real option is quit everything, go head over heels in. That's the right path. And I think for a lot of people, great. You know what industry you want to start a business in? Go learn more about that industry. Like there's different paths. And I think that it really is different for every single person. There's not a silver bullet for everybody. And I think anybody who's wanting to start a business, you have to step back and give yourself the space to be able to recognize what's the right path for me while still putting that pressure on yourself.
So good. I had a mentor tell me one time, he said, there's a million ways to make $1 million. This is just the way that I like to do it.
Love it.
If people want to get a hold of you, they want to follow along with your story, they want to connect with you on social because maybe they love what they heard, what's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, they can find me, Seth Silvers, on pretty much any social platform, and our website is successwithstories.com. That's where you can find more info on the clients we're serving, or if you guys want to talk about podcasting. We always say we'll talk with anybody about podcasting and we will help you. We might not be the right one. And so if I'm not the right fit to help you, we will be super clear about that and we'll connect you with the right person in the industry that can.
Seth, man, thank you so much. I can't wait to have you back.
Absolutely. Thanks.
Hey, buddy.